Hello, and a very warm welcome back to my YouTube channel. Now, I recently had the pleasure of going to El Salvador, and I have to say, I really enjoyed my stay. The people of El Salvador are very friendly, and it's so nice to see that from being one of the most dangerous countries in Latin America, it has become one of the safest. This, of course, is due to President Bukele's crackdown on the gangs, and he's put a lot of people behind bars. And President Bukele is also cracking down on corruption, so it's becoming much easier to do business in the country if you're a foreigner. Now, other positive things happening in El Salvador are that a new airport is being built in La Union in the east of the country, which will no doubt boost international tourism on the coast. Bukele also has plans to build a railway network from the west of the country all the way to La Union. And Bukele will get this through as his popularity is at levels which most leaders can only dream of. Just to give you an idea of how popular he is, not one person I met, and I met a lot of people in El Salvador and spoke to many people, not one person had a bad word to say about him. Sadly, though, I'm actually going to give you a number of reasons why I would not buy real estate in El Salvador. And the first and obviously main reason is that real estate prices are very expensive, particularly on the coast. And on the coast, there's actually very little for sale. And what is for sale is very pricey indeed. In the capital, San Salvador, it's a little more interesting. And I think the best area to look for properties if you're an expat is around La Zona Rosa, where you have the Central American University and the Museum of Art of El Salvador. Although, in all honesty, that did prove to be disappointing for the $5 I spent. Anyway, around here, I saw an apartment of just over 100 square meters for 275,000 US dollars. And it wasn't a bad apartment at all. It had three bedrooms and two bathrooms, although they were a little bit small. But I thought it was nice enough. Now, another area that is desirable is Colonia Escalon, and you can buy here a new apartment for around 3 to 3,500 US dollars per square meter. Now, the historic center is worth visiting, but I wouldn't buy here. It's not particularly a nice area of the city, especially I think if you're an expat. Now, many of you would say that these prices are not excessive, but when you take into consideration that the average net salary in San Salvador is less than 500 US dollars a month, it sheds a bit more light on how expensive property is. Real estate in San Salvador is completely unaffordable for the locals. So, in effect, this is my second reason for not buying property here. Now, I also went to a lovely colonial town called Suchitoto, which is about an hour and 10 minutes by car from the capital if there's no traffic. And I thought I'd found a bargain when I saw a se vende sign, I for sale sign, on what I thought was a big house. I spoke to the shopkeeper across the house to see if he knew the price of or indeed the owner of the property. Initially, I got excited when the shopkeeper said it was for sale for 90,000 US dollars, only to later find out it was a different, much smaller house. And believe you me, this was like a doll's house. The sign was referring to another house. And I really, at that time, said, okay, I'm actually completely giving up. Now, I also want to give you briefly some other reasons for not buying real estate in El Salvador. So, my third reason is GDP growth. Now, GDP growth in El Salvador has not been great from 1990 to 2024. It's averaged yearly about 0.75%, so less than 1%. That's not great. But more worryingly, despite Bukele's reforms, GDP growth recently has not been good. In Q3 of 2024, it actually contracted by 0.2%. And in the first two quarters, the economy only grew 0.39% and 0.13%, respectively. So this is not a booming economy, not at all. Number four, I want to talk about the high total government debt to GDP. Now, the ratio of total government debt to GDP in El Salvador is quite high. At the end of 24, it stood at nearly 85%. And back in 2013, it stood at 67.7%. And this does suggest that the scope for government spending in the future might be limited because of this. Now, number five, I want to just say another thing about El Salvador. And I think, especially if you're European and watching this video, um, if you're looking for to buy and relocate here, not for an investment, just to relocate, it's not cheap. Eating out is definitely not cheap in El Salvador. So even if you go to one of the fast food chains, and to be quite honest, there are far too many fast food chains in El Salvador. If you buy like a combo meal, so a decent amount of fries, burger, and let's say a Coke, you're going to spend about $9 to $10, which I thought that is really, really not cheap at all. And typically, if you go to a fairly nice restaurant, you have just a steak and chips or steak and potatoes with a bottle of water. That will cost around 25 to 30 US dollars, which I thought for El Salvador is very expensive. Definitely locals cannot afford to buy here. And if you shop at a Walmart for food, it's actually not cheap either. Prices for many food items in Walmart in El Salvador are more expensive than in Europe. So, for example, fruit. If you go to Walmart and buy fruit, it's a lot more expensive than countries like Italy, Spain, or Portugal. Now, number six, I want to talk about something which I think a lot of people don't talk about. The traffic is terrible. Not many people talk about the traffic in El Salvador, but particularly in and around San Salvador, it can be absolutely terrible due to the lack of good public transport. Just to give you an idea, when I arrived from LA, I landed at about 5:40 in the morning and was out of the airport by 6:30, thinking that I would get to the capital in less than an hour, or perhaps an hour, because it's not that near. But it actually took nearly 3 hours to get from the airport to where I was staying. And this is because the traffic is just insane. And it's actually quite bad even on a Saturday in San Salvador. And I was told that many people actually get up at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning who live outside San Salvador just to get to work on time because the traffic is so bad and there's no rail system. Number seven, another important one, which I actually just read up about, um, birth rate. The demographics in El Salvador are actually not that great. The birth rate per woman here is less than two, but more importantly, it's declining by around 1.5% each year. So the birth rate is about 1.7, whereas in Nicaragua and Guatemala, it's 2.2 and 2.3, respectively. And we know low birth rates are never good for the property market, especially for prices in the future. Number eight, briefly, I want to talk about taxes. Now, although El Salvador is not a particularly high rate tax country, it's not that tax friendly either, especially for a Central American country. So countries like Panama, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Guatemala, taxes are lower. El Salvador has a 30% corporate income tax rate, and the top personal income tax rate is 30% as well. And rental income tax is 30%. So if you're a non-tax resident in El Salvador, you'll pay 30% rental income tax. And if you sell your property after a year, you'll pay CGT, so capital gains tax at 10%. And I believe if you sell it within a year, you'll be paying it at the personal income tax rate. Um, and I just want to state number nine, I do think El Salvador still has a long way to go. Um, Look, there's been lots of progress, but I still think there's a long way to go. Infrastructure is still not great here. Many new roads need to be built and others improved. Many sidewalks are broken in San Salvador. So if you go to many of the side streets, you'll find a lot of broken sidewalks. And I think it will take a long time to do all the repair works. And in all honesty, as well, I think linguistic skills are not great. The vast majority of people in El Salvador do not speak English. Um, And when I look at property prices, the property prices I see today, I would expect those property prices to be 10, 15 years from now, not today. So property prices are already looking 10, 15 years ahead. And that's why also I wouldn't buy here. And number 10, finally, I think there's better places to buy property. Um, if you follow the channel, there are places in South Italy, even parts of North Italy, and other parts where property is a lot cheaper than in El Salvador, and the facilities are better. It's actually cheaper to shop, to eat out in many parts of Italy than it is in El Salvador, which is quite amazing. And the healthcare in countries like Italy is better than El Salvador. If you go private in El Salvador, I've been told it's actually quite good. But if you don't, it's a lot better in a country like Italy. And overall, if you follow the channel, I've looked at countries like Bulgaria. If I look at Bulgaria 10, 15 years ago, it was more advanced than El Salvador of now, and property prices were very, very, very low. And I profited from this. For example, my apartment in Varna over the last 10 years has more than trebled. But this is not going to happen in El Salvador. There's no way this is going to happen. I think the El Salvadorians are not selling their property. They're looking already 10, 15 years ahead, saying, we're going to keep it. We know it's going to go up in 10, 15 years. If you want to buy now, you've got to look at the future. But if you are buying now, it's just too high. It really is far, far too high. But one thing I do want to say, I do wish El Salvador all the best going forward. I really enjoyed my stay here. The people are wonderful. Please do visit the country. You will be welcome with open arms. Anyway, that's it for today. Thanks ever so much for watching, and I shall see you soon on the next video.